The hallways of Metropolitan Hospital buzzed with activity as Dr. Ethan Chen rushed through his morning rounds. At 28, he was the newest doctor on staff, having graduated from medical school just 18 months ago. His dark blue scrubs were slightly wrinkled from the long night shift, and the coffee in his hand was already lukewarm. Ethan had been up since 5 a.m., and it was only Tuesday. 3 more days to go before he could catch up on sleep. "Dr. Chen," a voice called out from behind him. Ethan turned to see Dr. Rivera, the head of the residency program, walking briskly toward him with a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Dr. Rivera," Ethan said, trying to hide his exhaustion. "I need you to take on an additional patient today," Dr. Rivera said, handing him the clipboard. "Room 507, Sophia Blackwell." Ethan's eyes widened as he looked at the chart. Everyone in the hospital knew about Sophia Blackwell, even if they weren't assigned to her case. The 42-year-old tech mogul had been in a coma for 3 months following a car accident that had made national news. Her company, Blackwell Innovations, was worth billions, developing cutting-edge AI software used by governments and corporations worldwide. "But isn't Dr. Thompson handling her case?" Ethan asked, confused. Dr. Thompson was one of the senior neurologists at the hospital with decades of experience. Dr. Rivera sighed. "He is, but we're short-staffed today. 3 doctors called in sick. That stomach bug is making its rounds. I just need you to handle the routine care, check her vitals, change her bandages. The basics. Dr. Thompson will still oversee her treatment plan." Ethan nodded, though his stomach tightened with nervousness. Sophia Blackwell wasn't just any patient. Her room was constantly monitored by hospital security, and there were rumors that her company's board members frequently visited to discuss business matters by her bedside, as if she could hear them. The pressure of caring for someone so high profile was intimidating, even if it was just for basic medical care. "I'll head there now," Ethan said, tucking the clipboard under his arm. Room 507 was at the end of a quiet hallway in the hospital's private wing. Unlike the standard rooms with their thin curtains and shared bathrooms, this one had wooden doors, sound insulation, and furnishings that looked more appropriate for a luxury hotel than a hospital. Ethan knocked gently before entering, though he knew there would be no response. The room was dimly lit, with sunlight filtering through partially closed blinds. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythmic backdrop to the otherwise silent room. And there she was, Sophia Blackwell, one of the most powerful women in the tech world, lying motionless on the hospital bed. Her face was thinner than in the magazine photos Ethan had seen, and her normally olive skin had a pale, waxy quality to it. Her dark hair had been neatly brushed and spread across the pillow, likely by one of the nurses. Despite being unconscious for 3 months, there was still something commanding about her presence. An older woman sat in a chair by the window, knitting what looked like a scarf. She looked up as Ethan entered. "Hello, I'm Dr. Chen," he said, keeping his voice low even though there was no medical reason to do so. "I'll be taking care of Ms. Blackwell today." The woman nodded. "I'm Rita, her housekeeper for the past 15 years. I come every day to sit with her." Her eyes were tired but kind. The other doctors usually just check the machines and leave. Ethan smiled. "Well, I like to be thorough. I'm going to check her vitals and change the bandages on her arms. The lacerations from the accident are healing, but they still need regular care." As Ethan went about his work, he noticed the photographs on the bedside table. Sophia standing in front of a sleek office building. Sophia shaking hands with what looked like foreign dignitaries. Sophia on a yacht, laughing with a glass of champagne in her hand, a life currently on pause. He carefully removed the bandages on her left arm, revealing a long gash that was healing but still looked angry and red. As he cleaned the wound, he found himself talking, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb Rita. "This is healing nicely, Ms. Blackwell," he said. "Another month and the scar will start to fade. You'll have to wear long sleeves for a while if you want to hide it. But given time, it might not be noticeable at all." He continued talking as he worked, telling her about the hospital's latest equipment upgrade, about the weather outside, a surprisingly warm spring day, and even about his struggles finding an apartment close to the hospital that he could afford on a resident's salary. "The real estate market is brutal," he said as he applied fresh bandages, "but I guess you know all about that, owning half the buildings in downtown." As he spoke, He thought he noticed a slight change in the brain activity monitor, just a blip. Really nothing significant enough to note in her chart. Still, it caught his attention. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself assigned to Sophia's care more frequently. The hospital remained short-staffed, and since he had already been briefed on her case, it made sense for him to continue. Each time he visited, he made a point to talk to her while he worked, updating her on hospital gossip or describing particularly interesting medical cases he'd encountered that day, keeping the details vague, of course to protect patient privacy. By the end of the week, Ethan was convinced that Sophia's brain activity increased slightly whenever he spoke to her. It wasn't enough to bring to Dr. Thompson. The changes were too subtle to show up in the official readings. But as a doctor who trusted his instincts, Ethan believed something was happening. "I read about your accident in the news," he said one afternoon while checking her IV. Rita had stepped out to get lunch and he was alone in the room with Sophia. "The police said you swerved off the road to avoid hitting a deer. Your car flipped 3 times before landing in a ditch. It's amazing you survived it all." He glanced at the monitor and saw another small spike in activity. "Your company's been in the news too. Your CFO, Thomas Warner, I think, has been making a lot of statements about the direction of Blackwell Innovations while you're resting. I don't follow business news closely, but even I've noticed that your stock has dropped about 15% since the accident." Another spike, slightly larger this time. Ethan leaned closer. "Ms. Blackwell, Sophia? Can you hear me?" He watched the monitor carefully, but the activity had returned to baseline. Maybe he was imagining things, seeing patterns where there were none because he wanted his patient to wake up. That evening, as Ethan was preparing to head home after his shift, Dr. Thompson stopped him in the hallway. "Chen, you've been spending a lot of time with the Blackwell patient," he said. His tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. Just following the care instructions. The nurses tell me you talked to her quite a bit." There was no accusation in his voice, just curiosity. "I do," Ethan admitted. "I've read studies suggesting that coma patients may be able to hear what's happening around them, even if they can't respond. I thought it might help her brain stay active." Dr. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Good instinct. Though I should warn you not to get too invested. Ms. Blackwell's condition is stable, but patients who have been in a coma this long, well, the outcomes aren't usually what we hope for." Ethan nodded, though he couldn't help feeling a spark of defiance. Medical school had taught him about statistics and probabilities, but it had also taught him that every patient was unique. And there was something about Sophia Blackwell that made him believe she wasn't ready to give up. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. He'd been thinking about Sophia's case all night and wanted to review her complete medical history before his shift started. There were some inconsistencies that bothered him. The description of the accident in the medical report didn't quite match what had been reported in the news, and some of the initial brain scans seemed to indicate a different type of trauma than what would be expected from a car accident. As he sat in the quiet hospital library, poring over her file, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sophia Blackwell's story than a simple accident. And somehow he had become part of it. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Ethan Chen first began caring for Sophia Blackwell. What started as a temporary assignment due to staff shortages had somehow turned into a regular part of his routine. Each day, between his other patients and responsibilities, Ethan would find time to visit room 507, check Sophia's vitals, change her bandages, and talk to her about anything that came to mind. Some of the nurses had begun to tease him about his dedication to the comatose tech mogul. "Got a crush on Sleeping Beauty?" one of them joked during a coffee break. Ethan had laughed it off, explaining that he was simply following the research about auditory stimulation for coma patients. But privately, he had to admit there was something more to it. A gut feeling that Sophia could hear him, that somewhere in the darkness of her mind, his voice was reaching her. On this particular evening, Ethan was more tired than usual. He'd been on his feet for nearly 12 hours, dealing with a sudden influx of patients from a bus accident. His back ached, and all he wanted was to go home and collapse into bed. But he still made his way to room 507 for his daily visit with Sophia. Rita, the faithful housekeeper, was just leaving as he arrived. "She had some company today," Rita said, gathering her knitting. "2 men from her company's board. They were discussing some merger, Didn't sound too happy about it. Ethan nodded. He'd overheard snippets of similar conversations when board members visited. From what he could gather, Blackwell Innovations was headed in a new direction that many believed Sophia would have opposed. "I'll just check her bandages and then let her rest," Ethan said. Once alone with his patient, Ethan went through his usual routine. The lacerations on Sophia's arms were healing well. Another week and they probably wouldn't need bandages at all. As he worked, he told her about the bus accident that had kept him busy all day. "Thankfully, no serious injuries," he said, carefully cleaning the wound on her left arm. "The driver had a heart attack at the wheel, but the bus wasn't going fast and hit a guardrail. 15 patients with minor cuts and bruises, 1 broken wrist, and the driver himself who's now in the cardiac unit." He sighed. "Made for a hectic day, though. I haven't even had time for lunch." As he applied fresh bandages, Ethan moved on to telling Sophia about a complex case he'd been consulting on. A patient with unusual symptoms that had the medical team puzzled. "The attending physician thinks it's lupus, but the test results don't quite match up," he explained, his focus split between the bandages and his story. "I've been reading about this rare autoimmune condition that has similar presentations, but affects the peripheral nervous system differently. I'm going to suggest we test for it tomorrow, though I'm just a resident, so who knows if they'll listen." So absorbed was he in his medical tale that at first, Ethan didn't register the slight movement of Sophia's hand. It was only when he heard a faint sound, a whisper so quiet it might have been just the rustling of sheets, that he looked up. Sophia Blackwell's eyes were open. Ethan froze, bandages still in his hands, thinking for a moment that he must be hallucinating from exhaustion. But no. Her eyes were definitely open, dark brown irises visible for the first time since he'd been assigned to her case. "Ms. Blackwell," he said cautiously, his heart beginning to race. "Sophia, can you hear me?" Her lips moved again, and this time he caught the whispered words. "That's fascinating." Ethan's medical training kicked in. He quickly pressed the call button for the nursing station while leaning closer to Sophia. "Don't try to talk too much," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "You've been in a coma for over 3 months. I'm Dr. Chen, Ethan. I've been helping with your care." Sophia's eyes remained focused on his face, showing a clarity that seemed impossible for someone who had just awakened from a prolonged coma. Patients who regained consciousness after such extended periods typically experienced confusion, disorientation, and often had difficulty speaking or forming coherent thoughts. Yet Sophia's gaze was sharp, alert, as if she had merely been asleep for a night rather than unconscious for months. "Water," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Ethan quickly poured a small amount of water into a cup with a straw and held it to her lips. She took a small sip, wincing slightly as the liquid went down her dry throat. The door burst open as a nurse rushed in. Responding to the call button, "She's awake," Ethan said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "Page Dr. Thompson immediately and get the on-call neurologist here. Also, we'll need to run a full panel of tests." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Thompson arrived within minutes, his usual composed demeanor giving way to open astonishment as he examined Sophia. A team of specialists was quickly assembled, and Sophia was whisked away for brain scans and other tests to assess her condition. Ethan found himself relegated to the sidelines as more senior doctors took over, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the hospital. Instead, he waited in the doctor's lounge, completing paperwork from his earlier shifts while anxiously checking the time every few minutes. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Thompson found him there. "Chen," he said, dropping into a chair across from Ethan. He looked both exhausted and exhilarated. "I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never seen anything like it." "Her tests?" Ethan asked eagerly. Dr. Thompson shook his head in amazement. "Almost normal. Some muscle atrophy, of course, which is to be expected after 3 months of immobility. But her brain activity is remarkably strong. She's speaking in complete sentences, her memory seems intact, and she's already asking about her company." He paused. "And she's asking for you." "For me?" Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. "She says she recognizes your voice, claims she's been hearing you talk to her for weeks now." Dr. Thompson studied Ethan's face. "You've been talking to her during your visits, haven't you?" Ethan nodded. "Every time. I read studies suggesting auditory stimulation might help coma patients, so I would tell her about my day. Interesting cases, just anything really. Well, it seems she was listening. Dr. Thompson stood up. She's back in her room now. You can see her if you want, but keep it brief. She needs rest. Ethan found Sophia propped up slightly in her bed, her complexion already looking healthier than it had just hours before. The room had been brightened, with several lamps turned on and the blinds open to reveal the city lights outside. Rita was there, tears streaming down her face as she held Sophia's hand. "Dr. Chen," Sophia said as he entered. Her voice was still weak, but there was a warmth to it that matched the small smile on her face. "My personal narrator. Finally we meet properly." Rita excused herself to call some of Sophia's close friends with the news, leaving Ethan alone with his now conscious patient. "How much do you remember?" he asked, taking the chair beside her bed. "Bits and pieces at first," she replied, "like listening to a radio station that keeps going in and out of tune. But over the past week or so, things became clearer. I could hear whole conversations." She looked directly at him. "Your voice was the most constant. You talked to me about real things, not just pleasantries or business matters like the others." Ethan felt a strange mix of professional satisfaction and personal connection. "That's incredible. From a medical standpoint, your level of awareness during the coma is quite unusual." Gathered that from the parade of shocked doctors who've been examining me for the past 2 hours. A hint of her famous business acumen showed through in her dry tone. They kept using words like miraculous and unprecedented. "They're not wrong," Ethan said. "Patients with your type of injury, who have been comatose for this long, typically don't just wake up and start having normal conversations." Sophia's expression turned serious. "About my accident." She hesitated, glancing toward the door as if checking who might be listening. "There's something you should know, Dr. Chen. Please call me Ethan." "Ethan." She nodded. "I remember the crash. Not all of it, but enough to know one thing for certain." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It wasn't a deer that caused me to swerve off the road. It was another car. Someone drove me off that cliff deliberately." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Are you sure? Sometimes trauma can affect memory." "I'm sure," she cut him off. "I remember headlights behind me getting closer and closer on that empty mountain road. Then a bump once, twice, pushing me toward the edge." Her hands gripped the blanket tightly. "It wasn't an accident. It was an attempt on my life." Before Ethan could respond, the door opened and 2 nurses came in to check Sophia's vitals. The moment for confidences had passed, but the look that Sophia gave him made it clear. This conversation wasn't over. Over the next few days, Sophia's recovery continued to astound the medical staff. Her muscle strength returned more quickly than anticipated, and cognitive tests showed no signs of impairment. News of her awakening had spread, and the hospital had to increase security around her room to deal with the press that had gathered outside. Ethan's role as her primary care physician was officially recognized, partly at Sophia's insistence. This meant he spent even more time with her, supervising her physical therapy and monitoring her progress. During these sessions, when they could be relatively sure of privacy, Sophia shared more of her suspicions with him. 2 weeks before the crash, I blocked a merger that would have given a Chinese tech firm access to our AI algorithms, she explained during a walking exercise in the hospital's private physical therapy room. Thomas Warner, my CFO, was pushing hard for it. The deal would have made the company billions, but I had concerns about how our technology might be used. "And you think Warner might have had something to do with your accident?" Ethan asked, careful to keep his voice down despite the empty room. Sophia's steps were becoming steadier each day. She gripped the parallel bars but walked with increasing confidence. "I don't know. It seems extreme even for corporate politics. But the timing—" She paused, both in speech and motion, looking troubled. "The first thing I asked Rita was what had happened with the merger while I was in the coma. Turns out the board approved it 6 weeks after my accident, with Warner leading the charge." "Have you told anyone else about your suspicions?" Ethan asked. "Not yet. I need more information before I make accusations." She gave him a searching look. "I'm not sure who I can trust. Most of my so-called friends from the business world visited once or twice in the beginning, then disappeared. The board members who came only talked business over my unconscious body." She managed a small smile. "You're the only one who just talked to me, like I was still a person." Ethan felt a wave of emotion he couldn't quite name. "It's basic medical practice," he said modestly. "Studies show that coma patients—" "Don't downplay it," Sophia interrupted gently. "You cared when no one else did. And now I need your help." "My help? I'm just a doctor. A doctor with access to my medical records who has no ties to my company or my industry." Her eyes held his. "Someone tried to kill me once, Ethan. I need to know why, and I need to make sure they don't try again now that I'm awake." Ethan knew he should refuse. Getting involved in what sounded like corporate espionage or worse was far beyond his role as a physician. Yet he couldn't deny the connection he felt to Sophia. A connection that had begun while she was still unconscious and had only strengthened since her awakening. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" He finally asked. "Just keep your eyes and ears open. Let me know if you notice anything unusual in my medical records or hear anything strange from visitors." She reached out and briefly touched his hand. "And maybe continue being the one person around here I can actually talk to." Despite all his professional training and better judgment, Ethan found himself nodding. "I can do that." What neither of them noticed was the small red light of a hidden camera, recently installed in the upper corner of the physical therapy room, its lens focused directly on them. The morning sun streamed through the windows of room 507, casting a golden glow over Sophia Blackwell as she sat upright in her hospital bed, typing furiously on a tablet. 2 weeks had passed since her miraculous awakening, and her recovery continued to defy medical expectations. Though still physically weaker than before her accident, her mind was as sharp as ever, perhaps even sharper, as if the 3 months of unconsciousness had given her brain time to rest and reset. Ethan knocked lightly on the open door before entering. "Good morning," he said, carrying a clipboard with her latest test results. "You're up early." Sophia looked up, a small smile crossing her face. Hard to break the habit of a lifetime. "I've been waking up at 5 a.m. since I started my first company 20 years ago." She set the tablet aside. "Besides, there's a lot to catch up on. 3 months is practically a lifetime in the tech industry." Ethan pulled up a chair beside her bed. What had started as a standard doctor-patient relationship had evolved into something more complex. Not quite friendship, but a partnership born of unusual circumstances. "Your latest blood work came back normal," he said, showing her the results. "And your muscle tone is improving faster than anyone expected. Dr. Thompson is talking about discharge within the week." A shadow crossed Sophia's face. "Leaving the hospital means losing the security it provides. Out there," she gestured toward the window. "I'm not sure what's waiting for me." "Have you remembered anything else about the accident?" Ethan asked quietly. She shook her head. "Just flashes. The headlights behind me on that mountain road. The feeling of being pushed toward the edge." Her hands tightened around the edge of her blanket. "But I've been doing some digging of my own." She reached for her tablet. "Take a look at this." Ethan glanced at the screen, which showed a series of emails between Thomas Warner, Sophia's CFO, and someone named Li Wei at Meridian Technology, a Chinese firm. "These were sent 2 days after my accident," Sophia explained. "Warner is discussing terms of the merger I had blocked, acting as if my unfortunate accident had already cleared the way for the deal to proceed." "How did you get these?" Ethan asked, surprised. "I still have friends in the company, people loyal to me rather than to Warner or the board. My executive assistant has been feeding me information." Her eyes narrowed. "Warner wasted no time taking advantage of my absence. Within 6 weeks of my accident, he had pushed through the merger I spent months fighting against. But that doesn't prove he was responsible for the crash," Ethan said cautiously. "No, but this might." She swiped to another screen showing bank statements. "A week before my accident, Warner transferred $200,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The money was withdrawn in cash 2 days later. Ethan's medical training hadn't prepared him for corporate intrigue and possible murder plots, but even he could see the implications. "You think he paid someone to run you off the road? It's a theory I'm working on." She put the tablet down and looked directly at him. "There's something else. I've been going through my medical records, the ones you helped me access, and I found some inconsistencies." This caught Ethan's professional attention. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The initial toxicology report shows traces of a sedative in my system, one I've never been prescribed and certainly didn't take voluntarily before driving on a mountain road at night." Ethan frowned. That wasn't in the summary I saw. Are you sure? It's in the detailed lab results from the night I was brought in, buried in page 4 of the report. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders. Someone drugged me before I got behind the wheel, Ethan. They set me up to lose control of the car, then made sure I went over the edge when that didn't work. The implications were chilling. If Sophia was right, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to eliminate her. And if that person discovered she was not only awake but investigating what had happened, they might try again. We need to take this to the police, Ethan said. Sophia shook her head firmly. Not yet. We don't have enough proof, and Warner has powerful friends in this city, including the police commissioner, who sits on my company's board. Before Ethan could argue further, a nurse knocked on the door. Dr. Chen, there's someone here to see Ms. Blackwell. Thomas Warner strode into the room before either of them could respond. In his early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone used to getting his way, Warner looked every bit the successful executive in his tailored suit. But there was something cold in his eyes that made Ethan instinctively step closer to Sophia's bed. Sophia. Warner's smile didn't reach his eyes. The miracle patient. The whole company is buzzing with the news of your recovery. Sophia's face betrayed nothing of their previous conversation as she greeted her CFO. Thomas, how kind of you to visit, though I'm surprised it took you 2 weeks to find the time. If Warner noticed the edge in her voice, he didn't show it. Business has been hectic. The merger with Meridian has entered its final phase, and there have been some complications. Complications? Sophia raised an eyebrow. What kind? Warner's smile tightened. Nothing for you to worry about right now. Your job is to focus on recovery. He glanced at Ethan with barely concealed disdain. I'm sure your doctor would agree. Actually, Ethan said, meeting Warner's gaze steadily, Ms. Blackwell's cognitive functions are fully intact. There's no medical reason she can't resume normal activities, including business decisions. Warner's expression hardened momentarily, before he forced another smile. Of course. I simply meant that the stress of jumping back into work might not be beneficial so soon after such a traumatic experience. Sophia's smile was equally forced. How thoughtful of you to be concerned. But I've had 3 months of rest, Thomas. More than enough. The tension in the room was palpable. Warner stayed for another 15 minutes, making small talk about the company while carefully avoiding any substantive business discussions. When he finally left, promising to return with proper legal documents to sort everything out, both Sophia and Ethan let out a breath. He knows, Sophia said quietly. He knows I'm suspicious. Maybe, Ethan agreed, but he doesn't know what evidence you have. And he certainly doesn't know about the toxicology report. Sophia's expression was grim. We need to move quickly. Once I'm discharged from the hospital, I'll have even less protection. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself drawn deeper into Sophia's investigation. Using his medical credentials, he accessed the original files from the night of her accident, confirming her discovery about the sedative in her system. More disturbingly, he found that someone had attempted to alter the digital records. The sedative had been removed from the summary that most doctors, including himself, would see. But it wasn't just the medical records that concerned him. Twice now, Ethan had noticed a man in a dark suit lingering in the hospital lobby when he arrived for his shift. The same man had been outside the hospital when Ethan left the previous evening. When Ethan mentioned this to Sophia, her face paled. Describe him, she demanded. Tall, maybe 6'2", short dark hair, military-style cut. No distinguishing features except for a small scar near his right eye. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her tablet and pulled up a photo. Is this him? Ethan stared at the screen, recognition dawning. Yes, that's him. Who is he? His name is Victor Reese. He works for a private security firm that my company sometimes contracts for sensitive matters. Her voice had dropped to just above a whisper. He reports directly to Warner. The implications were clear. They were being watched. That night, after his shift ended, Ethan drove home with one eye on his rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following him too closely. His small apartment, usually a sanctuary after long hospital shifts, felt exposed and vulnerable. He found himself checking the locks twice before finally collapsing into bed, his mind racing with everything he'd learned. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. determined to speak with Dr. Thompson about the alterations to Sophia's medical records. But as he approached the doctor's office, he heard raised voices from inside. The patient's discharge is a medical decision, not a corporate one. Dr. Thompson's voice was firm. I understand that, Doctor. The second voice belonged to Thomas Warner, but as her medical proxy while she was incapacitated and as a senior executive of her company, I have concerns about her mental state. The trauma of the accident followed by months in a coma, surely you can understand why additional psychiatric evaluation might be necessary before she returns to making critical business decisions? Ms. Blackwell has passed every cognitive and psychological assessment with flying colors, Dr. Thompson replied. There's no medical justification for holding her here longer or declaring her mentally unfit. Perhaps a second opinion would yield the same results. Dr. Thompson's tone was final. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to see. Ethan quickly stepped back from the door and busied himself with a nearby chart as Warner emerged from the office, his face tight with barely controlled anger. The CFO didn't notice Ethan as he strode down the hallway, phone already pressed to his ear. When Ethan told Sophia about the conversation, she wasn't surprised. He's getting desperate, she said. The merger with Meridian is set to finalize next week. If I return to the company before then, I could still block it. But why is this merger so important to him? Ethan asked, genuinely puzzled. Important enough to attempt murder? Sophia's expression darkened. That's what I couldn't figure out at first. Warner stands to make millions from this deal, but he's already wealthy. Why risk everything? She turned her tablet toward Ethan, showing a complex diagram of shell companies and financial transfers. I think he's being blackmailed. Ethan studied the screen, trying to make sense of the financial jargon. By Meridian? By someone at Meridian, most likely. My tech team found evidence that Warner has been funneling company research to them for at least a year. Proprietary algorithms, beta software, things worth billions on the open market. She sighed. I think they have proof of his corporate espionage and are using it to force the merger through. So he tried to kill you to save himself, Ethan said. The piece is finally clicking into place, and now he's trying to delay my discharge until after the merger is complete. Sophia's eyes met his, determination clear in her gaze. But we're not going to let that happen. As Ethan left her room, he spotted Victor Reese, Warner's private security man, standing at the end of the hallway, watching. Their eyes met briefly before Ethan turned and walked in the opposite direction, heart pounding. The stakes were getting higher by the day, and Ethan was acutely aware that he was out of his depth. His medical training hadn't prepared him for corporate espionage and attempted murder, yet he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Over the past weeks, his connection to Sophia had deepened from professional interest to genuine concern and something more. Admiration for her resilience, her sharp mind, and her determination to uncover the truth, no matter the risk. That evening, as Ethan was reviewing patient charts in the hospital library, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Need to meet. Urgent. Basement level. Radiology storage. Knowing the message seemed odd. Sophia rarely texted him directly, preferring to speak in person to avoid creating a digital trail. And why would she be in the basement? With her mobility still limited, the hospital's lower levels were practically inaccessible to her. Instinct told Ethan something was wrong. Instead of heading to the basement, he made his way quickly to room 507. He found Sophia sitting up in bed, working on her tablet as usual. She looked up in surprise as he burst through the door. Ethan, is everything okay? He showed her the text. Did you send this? Her face paled. No. I've been here all evening. They stared at each other, the realization hitting them simultaneously. It was a trap. Sophia reached for her phone. We need to call security. But before she could dial, the lights in the room flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by the glow of the medical equipment and their phone screens. Through the window, they could see that the power outage affected the entire floor, maybe the entire hospital. This isn't a coincidence, Sophia whispered, her voice tight with fear. They're making their move. The emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie red glow across Sophia's hospital room. Outside in the corridor, Ethan could hear the commotion of nurses and staff responding to the power outage, their voices tight with professional concern as they checked on patients. "We need to get you out of here," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent as he moved to the window, scanning the parking lot below. In the dimness, he spotted a dark sedan with tinted windows, idling near the emergency exit. The same type of car he'd seen Victor Reese driving, Sophia, was already disconnecting herself from the monitoring equipment with the efficiency of someone who had observed the process being done countless times. "The hospital will have backup generators," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. "We have minutes at most before power returns. Can you walk?" Ethan asked, turning back to her. "I'll manage." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, grimacing slightly. Her physical therapy had been progressing well, but she was still recovering from months of muscle atrophy. Ethan grabbed her robe from the closet and helped her into it, then peeked out into the hallway. The nurses were fully occupied with more critical patients, moving room to room with flashlights. No one seemed to be paying particular attention to room 507. "The service elevator," Sophia suggested, leaning against him as they stepped into the corridor. "It runs on a separate power system for emergencies, and it leads directly to the parking garage." Ethan nodded, impressed once again by her quick thinking. Together they moved down the hallway, Ethan supporting Sophia as she walked with determined steps. To anyone who glanced their way, they would appear to be a doctor helping a patient evacuate during the power outage. Nothing suspicious or unusual. They reached the service elevator without incident, and Ethan breathed a sigh of relief when the button illuminated, confirming Sophia's theory about its separate power supply. The doors slid open and they stepped inside. "Where exactly are we going?" Ethan asked as the elevator began its descent to the parking garage. The adrenaline of the moment was giving way to the realization that he was potentially throwing away his medical career by helping a patient flee the hospital against protocol. "I have a safe house," Sophia replied, her eyes fixed on the descending floor numbers. "A property not connected to my name or my company. Only Rita knows about it." She glanced at him. "You have a car, right?" Ethan nodded. "In the staff parking section." "Perfect. We'll take your car. They'll be watching for mine or any hospital transport." Her lips curved in a grim smile. "The advantage of being thought helpless is that they won't expect me to simply walk out." The elevator doors opened to the dim parking garage. Most of the emergency lights were functioning here, casting pools of yellow illumination between long shadows. Ethan scanned the area, then guided Sophia toward the staff parking section, trying to move quickly while still supporting her increasingly unsteady steps. "There," he said, pointing to his modest sedan parked in the corner of the garage. "Just a little further." They were halfway to the car when the sound of footsteps echoed from behind a nearby concrete pillar. Ethan tensed, pulling Sophia closer protectively as Victor Reese stepped into view, his imposing figure outlined against the emergency lights. "Dr. Chen," Reese said, his voice deceptively casual. "Taking your patient for a little drive? That seems highly irregular." Ethan straightened, forcing confidence into his voice. "The power outage is causing issues with the ventilation system on Ms. Blackwell's floor. I'm relocating her temporarily on Dr. Thompson's orders." Reese's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny, I just spoke with Thompson. He didn't mention anything about moving Ms. Blackwell." He took a step closer and Ethan noticed a slight bulge under his jacket that likely indicated a concealed weapon. "Why don't we all go back upstairs and sort this out?" "That won't be necessary." The new voice came from behind them and Ethan turned to see Rita emerging from between parked cars, a hospital security guard at her side. The older woman's usual gentle demeanor had been replaced with steely determination. "This man has no authority in this hospital," she told the security guard, pointing at Reese. "He's been stalking Ms. Blackwell since she woke up." The security guard, a former police officer by the look of his stance, sized up the situation quickly. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification, and you'll need to explain your presence in the staff parking area." Reese's expression darkened, his hand twitching slightly toward his concealed weapon, but the presence of witnesses seemed to make him reconsider. "Just doing my job," he said after a moment. "Making sure Ms. Blackwell is safe." "I'm perfectly safe with my doctor and my housekeeper," Sophia said, her voice ringing with the authority that had made her one of the most powerful CEOs in the tech industry. "Your services are not required, Mr. Reese. In fact, consider your firm's contract with Blackwell Innovations terminated, effective immediately. For a moment, Ethan thought Reese might still try something rash, but the man simply nodded stiffly and backed away. "Ms. Blackwell," he said almost formally, before turning and walking toward the garage exit. The security guard looked uncertain. "Ms. Blackwell, should I escort you back to your room?" "That won't be necessary," Rita said smoothly. "Dr. Chen is taking Ms. Blackwell to a private medical facility for some specialized treatment. All approved by Dr. Thompson." She handed the guard a folder that appeared to contain official-looking documents. "Here's the transfer paperwork." Ethan shot a questioning glance at Sophia, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug. Clearly, Rita had been preparing for this contingency. The security guard glanced at the papers, nodded, and handed them back. "Everything seems in order. Do you need any assistance getting to your vehicle, Dr. Chen?" "We've got it from here," Ethan assured him, impressed by the quick thinking of both women. "Thank you." Once the guard had moved out of earshot, Ethan turned to Rita. "How did you know to come here?" "I've been watching that man follow you for days," Rita said, her voice tight with disapproval. "And when the power went out, I knew something was wrong. I've been protecting Sophia for 20 years, young man, long before you came into the picture." Despite the tension of the moment, Ethan had to smile. "I'm very glad you're on our side." They reached Ethan's car without further incident. Rita helped Sophia into the passenger seat while Ethan started the engine. "You're not coming with us?" he asked, noticing that Rita made no move to get in the car. The older woman shook her head. "Someone needs to create a distraction. I'll tell them you took Sophia for tests at the main hospital across town. By the time they figure out you're not there, you'll be safe at the house." She handed Ethan a piece of paper with an address. "It's about an hour outside the city. There's food, clothes, and everything else you'll need." Sophia reached through the window and squeezed Rita's hand. "Be careful," she said softly. "You too, dear." Rita stepped back from the car. "Call me when you're settled." As they drove away, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror at the diminishing figure of Rita standing in the garage entrance. "She's remarkable," he said. "She's family," Sophia replied simply. "The only real family I have left." They drove in silence for a while, Ethan carefully checking the mirrors for any sign they were being followed. The city streets gradually gave way to suburbs, then to the winding roads that led into the hills surrounding the metropolitan area. "How did you know?" Sophia asked eventually. "About the text being fake?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road as he considered the question. "It didn't sound like you," he said finally. "Too direct, too urgent. And you've been careful about creating digital trails. It didn't make sense that you'd suddenly text me to meet somewhere isolated. Good instincts." Sophia's voice was warm with approval. They might have saved both our lives tonight. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in for Ethan. He had just helped a patient escape from the hospital, effectively kidnapping one of the most prominent business figures in the country. His medical career could be over. Worse, if Warner and his associates were truly willing to commit murder to protect their interests, Ethan's life was now in danger too. As if reading his thoughts, Sophia spoke again, her voice gentler now. "I'm sorry to drag you into this, Ethan. You didn't sign up for any of it when you became my doctor." "I made my choice," he said firmly, surprising himself with his lack of regret. "Besides, doctors are supposed to protect their patients, right? I'm just taking that oath a bit more literally than usual." That earned him a small laugh from Sophia, breaking some of the tension in the car. "Well, consider yourself hired as my personal physician, with a substantial raise from your hospital salary." The safe house turned out to be a modest but well-maintained cabin, nestled among pine trees, with a view of the valley below. It was secluded without being completely isolated. Ethan could see a few distant lights from neighboring properties, but none close enough for casual observation. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well equipped. The kitchen was stocked with non-perishable food. The living room had comfortable furniture and a fireplace, and there were 2 bedrooms with freshly made beds. "Rita comes up here once a month to check on things," Sophia explained as Ethan helped her settle onto the living room couch. The journey had taxed her still recovering body, and her face was pale with exhaustion. "It's been my emergency retreat for years. No one at the company knows about it. I bought it through a shell corporation under a different name." Ethan checked her pulse and breathing, falling back on his medical training as a way to center himself in the surreal situation. "You should rest," he advised. It's been a stressful night and your body is still healing. Rest can wait, Sophia said, pulling her tablet from the bag Rita had packed for her. We need to work fast. The merger with Meridian is scheduled to be finalized in 3 days. Once that happens, it will be much harder to undo the damage. For the next few hours, Ethan watched in amazement as Sophia worked, her fingers flying across the screen as she sent encrypted messages to trusted allies, accessed company servers remotely, and compiled evidence against Warner and his co-conspirators. Despite her physical weakness, her mind was operating at full capacity, connecting dots and anticipating obstacles with a strategic brilliance that explained how she had built her tech empire from nothing. Here, she said eventually, turning the tablet toward him. This is what Warner has been hiding. The screen showed technical schematics for what appeared to be some kind of advanced software architecture. This is the real reason behind the merger, Sophia explained. Our company has been developing an AI security system that can identify and neutralize cyber threats in real time. The U.S. government is interested in it for protecting critical infrastructure, but in the wrong hands, like a foreign intelligence agency, it could be repurposed to create undetectable backdoors into any system. And Warner was selling this to Meridian? Ethan asked, struggling to grasp the implications. Not directly, but the merger would give their engineers access to our research and development division. Within months, they could reverse engineer the core technology. Her expression was grim. Warner either didn't understand the security implications or, more likely, didn't care as long as he got his payout. So this isn't just corporate espionage. It's a national security issue. Exactly. Which means we have leverage. Sophia's eyes gleamed with determination. I've sent evidence to a contact at the FBI's cyber division. They're going to raid Meridian's U.S. offices tomorrow morning and seize their servers. Once they find proof of the attempted technology transfer, both the merger and Warner's career will be finished. Ethan stared at her, impressed and a little intimidated by the speed with which she had mobilized resources from a remote cabin in the woods. So we just wait? For now. Sophia finally set the tablet aside, the fatigue she'd been fighting beginning to show. Rita will call when she has news from the hospital. My FBI contact will update me on the raid. Until then, yes, we wait. The next day passed in a strange limbo. Ethan found himself alternating between his role as Sophia's doctor, monitoring her condition, ensuring she ate and rested, and that of fellow fugitive, constantly checking windows and jumping at unexpected sounds. They received a brief call from Rita confirming that she was safe and that the hospital was in an uproar over Sophia's disappearance, with Thomas Warner personally overseeing the search. Let him waste his time looking for us, Sophia said after the call, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Tomorrow he'll have bigger problems. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace sharing a simple meal of pasta that Ethan had prepared, the conversation shifted from strategy to more personal matters. Why medicine? Sophia asked, watching him over the rim of her water glass. You're clearly intelligent enough for any field. What drew you to healthcare? Ethan considered the question, finding it strangely intimate after the intensity of the past few days. My grandmother got sick when I was 12, he said finally. Cancer, the doctors who treated her were so clinical, efficient but detached. I remember thinking that medicine should be more than just treating symptoms or extending life. It should be about seeing the whole person. He shrugged, slightly embarrassed by his idealism. I wanted to be the kind of doctor who remembered that patients are people first. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. Like how you talked to me while I was in the coma. Exactly. Though I have to admit I never expected a patient to actually hear me, let alone remember what I said. I remember most of it, she said softly. You told me about your apartment search, about difficult cases, about the book you were reading. It wasn't just medical updates. You spoke to me like I was still there. You were still there, Ethan said simply, somewhere beneath the surface. Their eyes met across the small table, and Ethan felt a shift in the atmosphere between them, something that transcended their doctor-patient relationship or even their partnership as conspirators against Warner. For a moment, they were just two people connecting in a quiet cabin, away from the complications of the outside world. The moment was broken by the sharp ring of Sophia's secure phone. She answered immediately, listening intently before a slow smile spread across her face. It's done, she said after hanging up. The FBI raid found exactly what we expected on Meridian's servers. They've already taken Warner and 2 board members into custody. The merger is officially dead, relief washed over Ethan. So it's over? We can go back? Almost. Sophia's expression remained cautious. There's still Victor Reese to consider. He wasn't at the office when the arrest happened, and he's dangerous. The kind of man who ties up loose ends. You think he'll come after us? Ethan felt a renewed surge of anxiety. It's possible, which is why we're not staying here tonight. She stood up, moving with more strength than she had shown previously. Rita is sending a private security team, people I trust. They'll be here within the hour to take us to a secure location until all the arrests are finalized. True to her word, an unmarked SUV arrived at the cabin less than an hour later. The security team consisted of 2 former military personnel who efficiently swept the property, helped gather their few belongings, and escorted them to the vehicle. As they drove away from the cabin, Ethan found himself seated beside Sophia in the back of the SUV, their shoulders touching in the darkness. Without thinking, he reached for her hand and found it already extended toward his, their fingers intertwining in a silent acknowledgement of all they had been through together. "What happens next?" he asked quietly so only she could hear. "Tomorrow I reclaim my company," she replied, the determination in her voice tempered with something softer. "And then, we'll see. There's a place for a doctor with your skills and integrity in my organization, if you're interested." Ethan thought about the hospital, about his residency and the career he had planned so carefully. Then he thought about the past weeks with Sophia. The danger, yes, but also the sense of purpose. The connection that had formed between them against all odds. "I'm interested," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "Definitely interested." Outside the window, the stars were appearing one by one in the darkening sky as they left the cabin and its temporary sanctuary behind, heading toward an uncertain but promising future. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackwell Innovations headquarters, illuminating the tense faces around the massive conference table. 6 months had passed since Sophia Blackwell's miraculous awakening from her coma, and today marked her official return as CEO, a day that some in the room had hoped would never come. Sophia stood at the head of the table, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that disguised the last traces of her physical ordeal. To casual observers, she appeared exactly as she had before the accident, confident, commanding, and utterly in control. Only those closest to her, like Ethan Chen, who stood quietly near the door, could detect the occasional wince when she shifted her weight or the faint tremor in her hand when she became tired. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Sophia began, her voice strong and clear. "It's been an eventful 6 months, to say the least." A nervous chuckle rippled around the table. Eventful was putting it mildly. The arrest of Thomas Warner and 2 board members on charges of corporate espionage, attempted murder, and conspiracy had rocked the business world. The scandal had initially sent Blackwell Innovations stock plummeting, but it had rebounded as news of Sophia's recovery and return spread. "Some of you welcomed me back with open arms," Sophia continued, her gaze moving deliberately around the table. "Others fought against my return, claiming concerns about my health and mental capacity. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They had aligned themselves with Warner, though not closely enough to be implicated in his crimes. Now they found themselves facing the woman they had tried to push aside. "Today isn't about settling old scores," Sophia said, surprising some of them. "It's about the future of this company, a future that almost got derailed by greed and short-sightedness." She clicked a remote, and the wall screen behind her lit up with charts and projections. For the next hour, Sophia laid out her vision for Blackwell Innovations, a dramatic restructuring that would refocus the company on ethical AI development, cybersecurity, and medical technology. Gone were Warner's plans for aggressive expansion into consumer markets and military contracts. "The merger with Meridian would have made us billions in the short term," she acknowledged. "But it also would have compromised our core technology, and as we now know, potentially threatened national security. That's not the legacy I want for this company." From his position near the door, Ethan watched the board members' reactions with interest. Some nodded in agreement, clearly relieved to have their visionary founder back at the helm. Others looked more skeptical, mentally calculating how these changes would affect their stock options and bonuses. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind for Ethan as well. After that night at the cabin when Sophia had tentatively offered him a place in her organization, his life had taken a turn he never could have anticipated. He had taken a leave of absence from his residency, extended now to a full year, to serve as Sophia's personal physician during her recovery. The role had quickly expanded beyond medical care. As one of the few people Sophia trusted completely, Ethan found himself drawn into strategy meetings, included in confidential discussions about the company's future, and eventually appointed as the director of Blackwell's newest division, the Neural Recovery and Rehabilitation Foundation. It was a position that combined his medical expertise with Sophia's vision for technology that could help people recover from traumatic brain injuries and neurological conditions. Inspired by her own experience, Sophia had committed substantial resources to developing advanced monitoring systems that could detect awareness in seemingly unresponsive patients and create new therapeutic approaches for coma recovery. The foundation was set to launch officially next month, with state-of-the-art facilities already under construction. It represented everything Ethan had ever wanted in his medical career: cutting-edge research with immediate, practical applications for patient care. And yet there were moments like now, standing in this sleek corporate boardroom so far from the hospital corridors he had trained in, when he wondered at the strange path that had brought him here. And now, Sophia was saying, bringing Ethan's attention back to the meeting, "I'd like to introduce a key addition to our executive team. Many of you have already met Dr. Ethan Chen, who has been invaluable during my recovery." She gestured for Ethan to join her at the front of the room. He walked forward, conscious of the curious and assessing gazes of the board members. Most of them knew the basics of his story: the young doctor who had helped Sophia wake from her coma and later assisted in exposing Warner's plot. Few knew the full extent of what they had experienced together in those dangerous days. "Dr. Chen will be heading our new Neural Recovery Foundation," Sophia explained, "overseeing a $100 million investment in technologies designed to revolutionize how we understand and treat brain injuries." Ethan nodded to the board members, offering a brief overview of the foundation's goals and progress to date. As he spoke, he felt a familiar sense of purpose settle over him. This was why he had ultimately decided to step away from his traditional medical career: the chance to help thousands of patients like Sophia, rather than dozens. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of quarterly projections, regulatory challenges, and the ongoing legal proceedings against Warner and his co-conspirators. Finally, Sophia brought it to a close with a clear directive. "I expect your full support for this new direction," she told the board, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Those who cannot embrace it should consider their options carefully. Blackwell Innovations is entering a new era, and I intend to ensure it's defined by innovation and integrity, not by the kind of backroom dealing that nearly destroyed everything we've built." The implied threat was clear. The remaining board members who had aligned with Warner could either get on board with Sophia's vision or prepare to be replaced. From the expressions around the table, most were wisely choosing the former. As the board members filed out, several paused to welcome Sophia back or to express interest in the new foundation. Ethan observed the corporate politics at play, the jockeying for position in this reconfigured power structure, with detached amusement. His years in hospital hierarchies had prepared him somewhat for corporate dynamics, though the stakes here were measured in billions rather than departmental budgets. Finally, only Ethan and Sophia remained in the conference room, along with Rita, who had attended the meeting as Sophia's executive assistant, a role that vastly understated her importance in Sophia's life and recovery. "Well," Sophia said, allowing herself to sink into a chair now that appearances no longer needed to be maintained. "That went about as expected." "You were brilliant," Rita said, her usual no-nonsense tone softened with pride. "They didn't stand a chance." Ethan moved to Sophia's side, discreetly checking her pulse, a habit he had developed during her recovery. "How are you feeling?" That was a long meeting to stand through. "I'm fine," Sophia insisted, though she didn't pull her wrist away from his touch as she once might have. "A little tired, but nothing a good lunch won't fix." "Your blood pressure is up," Ethan noted. "We should take a break before your next meeting." "Always the doctor," Sophia said, but her smile took any sting from the words. The lines between their professional and personal relationship had blurred over the past months, shifting gradually from doctor and patient to colleagues to something more complex, a deep friendship built on shared trauma and mutual respect, with undercurrents that neither had yet fully acknowledged. Rita, ever observant, glanced between them and tactfully gathered her tablet and notes. "I'll have lunch brought up to your office," she said. "The reporters won't be here for another 2 hours, so you have time to rest." After Rita left, Sophia turned to Ethan, her professional demeanor softening. "So, Dr. Chen, how does it feel to be a corporate executive? Regretting your career change yet?" Ethan smiled, taking the seat beside her. "Ask me after my first budget meeting. But so far, watching you take back your company has been worth the price of admission." Sophia laughed, then winced slightly. Her ribs, though healed from the accident, still occasionally pained her. "Warner's face when I walked into the courtroom for his bail hearing last month. I wish I had a picture." The legal case against Thomas Warner and his associates was proceeding steadily. The evidence Sophia had gathered, combined with the FBI's findings from the Meridian raid, had created a nearly airtight case. Warner was facing decades in prison for his role in the corporate espionage plot and the attempt on Sophia's life. Victor Reese, Warner's security enforcer, had proved more elusive. He had disappeared the night of the FBI raid, presumably fleeing with whatever cash Warner had paid him. International law enforcement agencies had tracked him to Singapore, then lost his trail. His absence was the one loose end that sometimes kept Ethan awake at night, wondering if the man would someday reappear to finish the job he had started. Sophia seemed to read his thoughts. "The U.S. Marshals updated me this morning," she said. They found Reese. Ethan straightened in his chair. "Where?" "Brazil. He was trying to establish a new identity there." A grim satisfaction crossed her face. "They're beginning extradition proceedings. He'll face justice for what he did." Relief washed over Ethan. The specter of Reese had lingered in the background of their lives for months, an unspoken threat that had necessitated increased security and careful movements. That's good news. It means we can finally move forward," Sophia said quietly. "All of us." The all included more than just the two of them. Rita, who had stood by Sophia through everything. The loyal employees who had secretly fed Sophia information while she was in hiding. Dr. Thompson, who had defended Sophia's medical autonomy against Warner's attempts to declare her mentally unfit. Even the FBI agents who had pursued the case when many doubted a powerful CEO like Warner could ever be charged. It had taken a network of people, each doing their part, to bring the truth to light and ensure that justice prevailed. That perhaps was the most important lesson Ethan had learned from the entire ordeal. No one, not even someone as brilliant and determined as Sophia Blackwell, could fight such battles alone. The intercom on the conference table buzzed. "Ms. Blackwell," came Rita's voice, "your lunch is ready in your office, and Dr. Chen has a visitor waiting in the lobby." Ethan frowned, not expecting anyone. "Did they give a name?" "Dr. Rivera from Metropolitan Hospital." Sophia and Ethan exchanged surprised looks. Dr. Rivera had been Ethan's supervisor during his residency, the one who had first assigned him to Sophia's case all those months ago. "I should see what he wants," Ethan said, rising from his chair. Sophia nodded. "Use my private elevator. It will be faster than navigating the main lobby with all the press hanging around." Ethan found Dr. Rivera waiting in a small conference room off the main reception area, looking somewhat out of place in his rumpled doctor's coat amid the sleek corporate surroundings. "Dr. Chen," Rivera said, standing to shake Ethan's hand. "You're looking well. Corporate life seems to agree with you." "It's different," Ethan admitted, "but the work is meaningful." "What brings you here, sir?" Dr. Rivera hesitated, then said, "Two things, actually. First, your leave of absence is coming to an end next month. The hospital needs to know if you're planning to return to complete your residency." Ethan had been expecting this question, though not delivered in person by the head of the residency program. His year away from traditional medicine had been professionally risky. Residents who interrupted their training rarely returned to complete it, especially after being drawn into high-paying corporate roles. "I've been thinking about that a lot," Ethan said carefully. "The foundation work is important, but so is completing my medical training." "Which brings me to my second reason for visiting," Dr. Rivera said. "I've been following the news about this Neural Recovery Foundation. It's impressive work, pioneering, really. The hospital board is interested in establishing a formal partnership, sharing research, providing clinical trial space, that sort of thing. Ethan raised his eyebrows in surprise. That would be incredibly valuable. We thought so too. And it would allow you to complete your residency requirements while continuing your work with the foundation. A dual appointment, so to speak. Dr. Rivera smiled slightly. We're not eager to lose a physician with your potential, Dr. Chen. But we also recognize that traditional medical paths aren't the only way to make an impact. The offer was unexpected but perfect, a way to bridge the two worlds Ethan had been struggling to reconcile. I'd need to discuss the details with Ms. Blackwell, of course, he said. But speaking personally, I'm very interested. After Dr. Rivera left, Ethan made his way back to Sophia's private office on the top floor of the building. He found her at her desk, reviewing documents while picking at a salad. Good news? She asked, noting his expression. Ethan explained Dr. Rivera's proposal. It's an ideal solution, he concluded. The foundation gets access to clinical resources we need, and I can complete my medical requirements without stepping away from our work here. Sophia studied him thoughtfully. Is that what you want? To keep a foot in both worlds? I think so, Ethan said honestly. I never planned to leave medicine entirely. Being a doctor is still part of who I am, even if my path has taken some unexpected turns. Because of me, Sophia said, a hint of guilt in her voice. With you, Ethan corrected gently. There's a difference. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched between them filled with all the things they hadn't yet said to each other. Their relationship had evolved gradually over the months of Sophia's recovery, from the initial doctor-patient dynamic to co-conspirators against Warner, then to colleagues and friends. But there had always been reasons to maintain some professional distance. Her ongoing recovery, the foundation launch, the legal proceedings against Warner. Now, with Reese located and Warner's case proceeding, with the company back under Sophia's control and the foundation taking shape, those reasons were fading. We should discuss the hospital partnership in detail, Sophia said, finally breaking the moment. But later. Right now, we both need to prepare for the press conference. Ethan nodded, accepting the return to business matters. I'll have my team draft a proposal for how the clinical integration might work. 2 hours later, they stood together at the podium in the Blackwell Innovations lobby, facing a sea of reporters and cameras. Sophia, poised and commanding, announced her full return as CEO and unveiled the Neural Recovery Foundation as the company's newest initiative. When it came time to introduce Ethan as the foundation's director, she turned to him with genuine warmth. Dr. Chen's innovative approach to patient care was what helped me find my way back from the darkness, she told the assembled press. His voice was my lifeline when I was trapped in a coma, unable to communicate but still aware. Now, through this foundation, we hope to create similar lifelines for thousands of patients worldwide. The questions from reporters came rapid fire after that, most focused on the business implications of Sophia's return or the ongoing legal case against Warner. But one reporter asked a question that cut through the corporate language to something more personal. Ms. Blackwell, you've described being aware during your coma, even hearing. No conversations around you. What was that experience like? And how has it changed your perspective on life and business? The room quieted as everyone waited for Sophia's answer. She paused, considering the question with a seriousness that went beyond the usual corporate responses. Imagine floating in darkness, she finally said, her voice softer than before. You can hear voices, but you can't respond. You're completely helpless, completely dependent on others, which is not a familiar state for someone in my position. A small smile touched her lips. It changes you. When the only voice consistently speaking to you as a person, rather than a problem to solve or an asset to manage, is that of a doctor you've never even met. It makes you reconsider what matters. She glanced at Ethan briefly before continuing. As for how it's changed my perspective on business, Blackwell Innovations was always focused on technology that could improve lives. But now that mission has a more personal meaning. The foundation is just the beginning. Every division of this company will be evaluated based not just on profit potential, but on genuine positive impact. After the press conference ended, Ethan and Sophia retreated to her office to review how it had gone. Rita brought them coffee and then tactfully withdrew, leaving them alone. You did well with that last question, Ethan said, loosening his tie as he settled into one of the comfortable chairs facing Sophia's desk. I meant what I said, she replied, coming around to sit in the chair beside him rather than behind her desk. About what matters. The evening sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the office. In this light, with her guard down, Ethan could see both the powerful CEO who had reclaimed her company and the vulnerable patient who had fought her way back to consciousness against overwhelming odds. You know, Sophia said after a moment, when I first started hearing your voice in the darkness, I imagined what you might look like. I pictured someone older, maybe with gray hair and glasses. She smiled. Reality was quite different. Disappointed? Ethan asked lightly, though he found himself genuinely curious about her answer. Not at all, she said, meeting his eyes directly. Just surprised by how things turned out. All of it. She gestured around them, indicating the office, the company, their unlikely partnership. If someone had told me a year ago that being pushed off a mountain road would ultimately lead to something positive, I would have called them insane. And now? Now I think sometimes we find our most important connections in the most unlikely circumstances. Her hand moved across the small space between their chairs to rest lightly on his. I've been focused on recovery, physical, professional, getting justice. But at some point, life has to be about more than just recovering what was lost. Ethan turned his hand to clasp hers, a gesture that felt both natural and significant. Moving forward instead of just getting back to where you were, he suggested. Exactly. Sophia's smile deepened. The foundation is part of that. This partnership with the hospital could be another piece. But I think there's more for both of us beyond the professional collaboration. The intercom buzzed before Ethan could respond, breaking the moment. Rita's voice came through, apologetic but firm. Ms. Blackwell, your call with the Tokyo office is scheduled in 5 minutes. Sophia sighed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. Always something, she said, but her eyes held a promise as she stood. We'll continue this conversation. Soon. Ethan nodded, rising as well. I should check in with the foundation team anyway. They'll be excited about the potential hospital partnership. As he headed toward the door, Sophia called after him. Ethan? He turned back. Yes? Thank you, she said simply. For talking to me when no one else would. For believing me when it mattered. For everything. You're welcome, he replied, knowing the words were inadequate for the journey they had shared. I'll see you tomorrow. As he left the office and headed toward the elevator that would take him to the foundation's floors, Ethan reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. What had begun with a routine assignment to change a comatose patient's bandages had transformed into the most significant chapter of his life, professionally and personally. The elevator doors opened, revealing Rita inside, apparently on her way down as well. Perfect timing, she said with a knowing smile. I was just coming to find you. Is something wrong? Not at all. She handed him a small envelope. Sophia asked me to give you this, for when you're ready. Inside the envelope was a key and an address, the cabin in the woods where they had hidden during those dangerous days after escaping the hospital. She's going there this weekend, Rita said, her expression warm but carefully neutral. Just to get away from the corporate chaos for a few days. She thought you might want to join her. To continue your conversation. Ethan tucked the envelope into his pocket, a sense of possibility filling him. Thank you, Rita. The older woman patted his arm affectionately. You know, in all the years I've known Sophia, I've never seen anyone reach her the way you did. Literally through the darkness to find her. Some connections are just meant to be, no matter how unlikely their beginnings. As the elevator descended toward the foundation's floors, Ethan thought about those unlikely beginnings. A young doctor assigned to a routine task. A voice speaking into darkness, an awakening that changed everything. 6 months ago, he had been a resident physician changing the bandages of a comatose tech mogul. Now he stood at the threshold of a future he could never have imagined, leading a foundation that could help thousands of patients, partnering with the hospital to bridge two worlds and, perhaps most remarkably, finding a connection with someone who had heard his voice when she could hear nothing else. The elevator doors opened onto the bustling activity of the foundation offices. Life was moving forward. Not just recovering what had been lost, but creating something new and unexpected, something better. Ethan stepped out into that future, ready for whatever came next.